So with the release of 28 Years Later coming up soon, I thought it would be prudent to not only review but also watch the first two movies in this trilogy for a first time. On top of that, I'm also trying to be more familiar with Alex Garland's work, so let's start at the beginning with 28 Days Later, and I really enjoyed this movie. Now, what I really loved most about this movie was the world building and how it was able to communicate its tone and atmosphere throughout the film. A particular sequence that comes to mind comes from the very initial incident of the movie where the main character wakes up after the coma and just him walking around the city observing the natural environments and what happened. And this is very similar to kind of like The Walking Dead, even though this movie came out before The Walking Dead, but it does a really great job of setting the scene and atmosphere and just how lonely and isolated this whole thing is. And the music at a certain point does a really great job with the realization that the main character is facing at that particular moment. Speaking of the use of music and the music in and of itself, I absolutely love the main theme to this movie. Not only by itself is it really powerful and encompassing to this movie, but the way that it's used and how little and sparingly it's used, it leads to some really powerful impact near the end of the movie, which in turn leads to some incredibly satisfying moments. All the other song choices in this movie that I decided to include and how they were included were also very well done and interesting with how they were used. The characters in this movie are all very well rounded and relatable and very likable. I especially want to praise with how these characters are developed and their relationship and dynamics and arcs throughout the film. There's going to be some spoilers, so if you don't want to see those, then skip ahead to this point. Now, an example of great character development that comes to mind for me in this movie is how Selena deals with the character Mark after he's been infected, and especially just how early in the movie they're willing to kill off Mark. Not only are we introduced to him and does feel like he has a good amount of personality and we begin to form ideas that he's going to be a main character in this movie, but the fact that he gets infected so early and killed off so early really does do a great job of saying the stakes of this movie that anyone can go. Not only that, it really helps develop and showcase Selena as a character and how she's unwilling to take any chances, therefore providing tension between her and the main character. Another fun character moment for me in this movie is when all four characters are in the grocery store and they decide to grab some supplies while they have the chance. I really love the way that they all interact with each other throughout the grocery store, and a particular moment that comes to mind is when Frank tells Jim that he can't just grab any random bottle of scotch, and we as audience members think that they can't spend their time just getting useless things and actually have to think about being conservative, but then he actually goes and grabs a much higher quality scotch. That's just a fun little character moment that showcases him as a person. Going back to kind of something I mentioned a little bit earlier, but this movie does a really great job with exploring its main idea of themes of survival and what you have to do to survive, obviously with Selena's character herself. But I also want to point out that near the end of the movie with the situation with the army base and the army members there. Now, to anyone who's seen the movie, you obviously know what I'm talking about, and obviously know that I probably can't say it on here, but just I found that to be a very powerful method to tell the story and themes of survival. I also found the relationship and dynamic between Selena and Jim as characters to be very natural and very fitting, and also incredibly satisfying at the end of the movie. Sure, it's something you can see being set up, but at the same time that doesn't make it any less satisfying and happy to see near the end of the movie. Speaking of something along the lines of world building, I absolutely love the narrative decision to have this movie set in Britain and it being isolated in a mandatory quarantine. It certainly is a good idea to think about the social implications of such a decision, and it does provide a good amount of forethought going into this universe. Now, the very last thing that I want to talk about in this movie would be the technical aspects, specifically its visual look and style and the kind of lower quality film that this movie uses. Now, the lower quality visual element of this movie did catch me off guard at the very first part of it, but then after doing some more research and reviewing, I found that it really does a good job of fitting the overall style to this movie. I love the shots of it going through isolated London, completely abandoned except for Jim as a character, and the fact that it is kind of grainy does a really great job of setting that atmosphere and mood to it. It's very quick cutting in the action scene, although that can be distracting in other movies, was very well done. It rode that fine line between quick cutting to make it more energetic and exciting, and just between being very annoying and authentic. Now, overall, this movie does have a lot of really good qualities to enjoy about it. I don't think I love it as much as other people love this movie, but I would definitely say it's worth a watch, and this one gets a more generous 7 out of 10. Alright, so 28 weeks later. Now I did actually really enjoy this movie, but for radically different reasons for the ones that I enjoyed 28 days later. This is such a hilariously stupid, awful, terrible movie. Terrible editing, terrible performances, terrible character decisions, terrible writing, terrible pacing, terrible communicated emotions or attempted communicated emotions throughout this movie. If I had to describe this movie in one word, it would be a mess. So right when this movie starts off, I found it pretty funny how the wife character just starts exposition dumping in the very first scene of the movie saying, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that we sent our children away on a vacation or whatever, and I hope that they're safe." And the context in which she says that just comes out of nowhere, like, hey, 10 seconds ago you were just basically preparing something and now you just drop this bombshell like, oh, I'm so glad we have kids and they're away. The way that this film opens up and the way that it introduces its main characters is very confusing to me. It feels like they're trying to recreate the effect that they had in the first movie with the character Mark of having him be introduced but also killed off at the same time. It feels like that because there are a good amount of characters introduced in this sequence in the beginning of the movie who are eventually all killed off because of some stupid decision of letting a kid in and having all the zombies come in or whatever. But the reason why 28 Days Later works and why this one fails in that regard is the fact that that main character in that movie had a good job of establishing his presence throughout the film. These people barely even have screen time and they try to introduce so many of them that just becomes too distracting and nauseating. Anyways, at one point the group of survivors are sitting in their little cabin hide away from the rest of the world and they hear a knock on the door. They look out the window and see it's a little boy begging for his life, so they let him in, and then a few minutes later a whole horde of zombies shows up because they were following the little boy, I guess. And after that they pretty much immediately just start killing everyone in sight and everybody makes some really dumb decisions to defend themselves. Another really big issue with this scene here in particular is the fact that it's just so terribly edited and shot and choreographed that it's genuinely difficult to understand what's even happening. It's just so incredibly sloppily done. Not to mention something that really irked me personally is that they used the 28 Days Later theme in this scene, and it was just so not the time to utilize that particular theme in this particular moment because it needs to feel as if it's been building up to something. And not to mention they use it a good number of times throughout this film and it just really loses its powerful energy that it had in the first movie. Anyways, at one point the man character goes upstairs to find his wife and the little boy trapped by a zombie, and the wife is begging the man not to leave them with the zombie in the room, and it's really funny because he actually ends up blocking them both in the room and makes a run for his own life. The entire way that this scene was presented honestly seemed like a satire of this kind of a movie. Anyway, so his wife is really mad at him and he's running away and he gets to the boat where the other guy is setting it up. They get into the water but the other guy falls overboard, is pulled in by a zombie and he immediately dies, so the main character man is the only one left in the entire survivor group. Anyways, after this whole event we're then introduced to the opening title sequence of the film, or the title crawl or whatever it's called, and then we're now taken to London in the perspective of the two main children in this movie who are the main characters. We learn that London is being reintroduced back into the population. It seems like they've been able to deal with the zombie outbreak for the most part, with just a few areas that need to be cleared off and they're building up safe zones. And the man from the beginning of the movie is the dad to these two kids and he's working for the government or whatever as some security consultant, I think. I honestly don't remember what his job is technically. And when his kids start asking about their mom and the story of how she died, he obviously lies to them and told them that he tried to save her but just couldn't, even though he ran away. And now would be a good time to mention that the child actors in this movie were very unconvincing throughout the entire film. They take up a lot of screen time in this movie and there's never once instance where I can find myself believing their performances. And also during the scene of which they're being reintroduced to London, we're also introduced to Jeremy Renner's character, and he's a military sniper and he's meant to be providing security in Overwatch or whatever. And we're also introduced to another scientist character in this movie who will come back into play later. So the next day the boy and girl decide to go past the safe zone where they decide to try to find their own house because the boy wants a picture of his mom. Anyway, so they're just hanging out in the house looking for other stuff to do, and at one point the boy hears a noise in the attic, so he decides to go up there and check because he thinks it's his sister playing a joke on him. He goes up there and he sees his name written on the wall along with his sister written on the wall, and the photos just presented in a very odd way. He then hears some scratching behind a couch and it turns out it's his mother, and she's actually alive but kind of somewhat infected, but not really. Like she's still sentient in some way. And the boy's very happy to see her and they start hugging, and then it's very clear that she's not letting him go and he has to kind of push her away at one point. And just at this moment the sister shows up in the attic and they decide to run out the front door where the guards are waiting for them, because earlier the guards saw them very clearly leave the safe zone and they waited all this time for this particular moment to come in and save them. I mean, if they were going past the border, why not just stop them right there? Why do you have to wait for them to waste so much time exploring this area before you got them? That seems pretty dangerous. Anyways, they get the 2 kids back, and then they basically grab the mom who's infected and they bring them back to the facility. They quarantine the 2 kids and bring the mom into a separate room where they lock her down so they can study her or whatever. And this is a very confusing part in the movie for me personally, because the dad shows up for the 2 kids and he's very angry at them and he starts asking them questions. And then the kids call him out on his BS that he told them that she died and that basically he tried to save her, but in actuality that was a full lie. And this is the closest thing they ever come to having a payoff to that sort of setup in the beginning of the movie of having any sort of character drama, because it doesn't really feel like that's really addressed at all as some sort of character drama between the 3 of them. And shortly after this scene, the man actually goes to his wife who is locked down on the gurney, opens the door and starts unlocking her and acting like he wants to kiss her and make up with her or something, and then she bites his face off and there's blood everywhere and everything's getting infected. And while this is going on, the scientist lady from the beginning of the movie starts questioning the general and asking him if she can study this person, but the general says, no, we have to destroy this person, whatever, blah blah blah, which seems pretty illogical. Like, you could probably study the virus and come up with more of a vaccine or something, or just ways to protect yourself from it. And despite the large military presence in this movie, and especially in this facility, it seems like they do a pretty terrible job of containing the virus, which is the entire point of this whole facility, because as soon as this thing gets loose, it immediately starts infecting everybody, and they just don't have doors or whatever to lock down other areas to prevent viruses from getting out. It is genuinely funny and mind-blowing just how quickly this all goes so terribly and so south. I was genuinely laughing throughout this whole scene. Eventually there's mass panic in the facility and the surrounding residence area where everyone's living and they're all running, and very shortly after they tell the snipers to start just shooting everybody because they don't want the virus to spread even more, at which point everyone starts running in the courtyard being chased by zombies and being shot at by the snipers. And then at that particular moment, Jeremy Renner notices the boy in his scope and then decides not to shoot him to have a bit of humanity in him. And also the scientist lady told him to keep an eye on them because they're very valuable, because apparently their mother was able to resist the virus in some way, so she thinks that there's something in the DNA that can be helpful to the fighting of this virus or whatever. So during this whole event, Jeremy Renner makes his way to the bottom floor where he meets up with the scientist and the 2 kids and some other survivors and decides to lead them out this way. And this is part of the movie where I was genuinely getting confused to thinking what the emotional relationship between the characters should have been, because I was definitely expecting more from the father and children characters of confronting the fact that the father left the mother to die, but that was never really resolved to begin with. And then I was thinking that there was going to be more of a building relationship between the boy and the soldier of Jeremy Renner's character. That also feels incredibly underdeveloped, like they hang out for maybe less than half a day to save him or whatever. Anyway, so they make it out of London and then they get into the countryside. Jeremy Renner is able to radio into one of his helicopter pilot friends, and he tells him to pick him up at these locations. And before I go on to what happens next, I also just kind of want to take a moment to reflect on everything and how that situation was handled back at the military facility and residence, because it seemed like they chose the nuclear option rather quickly because they were also calling in for airstrikes on the city as well. It just seems like they did such a terrible job of containing this entire virus to begin with, not to mention just building the defenses and everything to it. Anyway, so some zombies show up in the field on their horizon and they start attacking them, and the helicopter pilot shows up and notices that he has some other people with him, which he wasn't expecting. So he basically tells them, I'm not willing to pick up anybody but you, so you have to get rid of these people or whatever, and he's trying to explain to him that they're important, that they need to be saved. But the zombies get too close and he has to fly away anyway, so they choose a different stadium point to meet up to for the evac. So they go back through the city to try to meet up at that stadium, at which point there's a huge chemical wave going at them, and basically they try to get in the car to have some aired off sealed way and get into the stadium faster, but the car isn't starting, so Jeremy Renner decides he's going to sacrifice himself and start pushing the car behind and basically tells them all to get out of there. And that was very confusing because, as I mentioned earlier, I was really expecting there to be more of a relationship and emotional build up to that scene, and also just dynamic with the other characters. And it's kind of implied that there is sort of that thing throughout the film, especially when he dies, but it doesn't really feel justified at all. And it certainly doesn't feel earned. Anyway, so the 3 of them, that being the 2 kids and the scientist lady at the beginning of the movie, make it to the subway station. It's dark, so the lady is using the night scope on the rifle to try to find her way through it. Eventually she screws up so bad that she eventually accidentally ends up pushing one of the kids down the stairs with a bunch of broken bones on it from dead people. At one point the lady is walking around and I think she gets killed by a zombie or eaten or something. I'm pretty sure she dies, but a little bit fuzzy on the details right now. And then I believe the girl grabs the rifle and starts using it to defend her brother, but the the brother's bitten and he starts running away. But then she looks into his eyes and sees that there's no real thing anyways, indicating that he has the virus. So they finally make their way to the stadium, and despite the fact that this pilot very clearly said that he's not taking anyone else, these two kids just show up and he decides, okay, whatever, I'll take you. It doesn't really matter at this point. So they get to France, and the movie ends showing a greater outbreak in France and other Europe, and it was just so funny thinking that these two kids were going to end up safe and just ends up screwing up the entire population of Europe. And not to mention they used the 28 Days Later theme a good number of times throughout this film, which really kills its effectiveness. This whole movie felt like it took an hour of build up to get to absolutely nothing, from introducing Jeremy Reiner's character to introducing the kids to introducing the dad and the conflict with the mom of letting her die at the beginning of the movie, to introducing the idea that the kids might be somewhat immune or something, only for it to just end in total nonsense. Not to mention, I'm really confused what the sort of arc or survival theme was meant to be throughout this film. It really felt like they had too many ideas going into this movie in terms of characters, ideas, and just basically story elements that did not work well together, but instead of just cutting them, they tried to cram them all into the movie. I'm not really sure about the production of this movie, but I wouldn't be surprised to learn it was kind of a development hell kind of thing, with a lot of people being involved in the script. As I mentioned before, there are so many plot holes brought on by just sheer character stupidity, like the fact that the kids want to go outside the safe zone to try to find a picture of their mom, and the fact that the facility was just so terrible it contained the overall virus and just letting them be infected and just fail so quickly, to the general not wanting to investigate the mere possibility that this woman could be somewhat useful to their cause in fighting the virus. The characters themselves were very bland, and I don't think there was a single solid performance throughout this entire movie. It just felt like everybody was really lacking and didn't have that much clear direction or even just care in writing into their characters. Oh, not to mention every single action sequence in this movie was terribly shot and terribly edited, just like the action sequence at the beginning of the movie. As I said earlier, this whole movie was just a mess from start to finish. There were several ideas and plot threads just left open and cut off immediately that never felt like they were resolved properly. There's a huge lack of an arc or even just general survival theme or journey with the main characters that feels emotional or relatable. In all honesty, if you're in the mood to watch a so bad that it's a good movie, then I would definitely recommend this. But if you just want to skip on it and don't really feel like doing that, then I would recommend you stay far away from that. And this one gets a 2 out of 10.